On my wedding day, my future mother-in-law walked into the bridal suite and threw a legal document onto my vanity, demanding half of my $1 million home. I looked at the man I was about to marry, waiting for him to defend me. When he smiled and handed me a pen instead, I asked two simple questions. What happened next resulted in canceled caterers, a police threat, and 50 missed calls by midnight. I am Cassidy, 33 years old, and a financial risk analyst by trade. My entire career is built on spotting bad investments before they ruin a portfolio. But somehow, I completely missed the massive red flags in my own personal life until exactly 1 hour before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to walk away from a toxic situation to save yourself. It was exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The bridal suite at the Seattle waterfront venue smelled heavily of expensive hairspray and imported white roses. I was standing in front of a massive gilded mirror, wearing a custom $5,000 silk gown that I had paid for entirely in cash. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 2. Outside those heavy oak doors, $80,000 worth of floral arrangements, gourmet catering, and premium open bar service awaited our 200 guests. I had worked exhausting 60-hour weeks to pay for every single detail of this day from my personal accounts. I was just adjusting my veil, feeling that mix of exhaustion and excitement, when the suite door swung open without a knock. I turned around expecting to see my bridesmaids returning with champagne. Instead, my future mother-in-law, Patricia, marched into the room. She was 60 years old and wearing a champagne-colored dress that looked entirely too much like a wedding gown. Bradley, my fiancé, trailed right behind her. He was 34, a mid-level marketing manager who loved projecting the image of an elite tech executive complete with a perfectly tailored designer tuxedo. Neither of them was smiling. There was no warmth, no happy tears, no excitement for the big day we had spent a year planning. Patricia did not even tell me I looked beautiful. She did not even say hello. Instead, she walked straight up to my makeup station, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor, and slammed a thick stack of legal papers right next to my mascara. I looked down at the documents. The bold black letters across the top page read, "Quitclaim Deed." I felt my stomach drop instantly. As a financial analyst, I knew exactly what that piece of paper was. It was a binding legal mechanism to transfer property ownership. Patricia tapped her manicured acrylic nail against the signature line. "Sign it," she commanded, her voice cold and utterly flat. I stared at her, genuinely thinking this was some bizarre, poorly timed prank. "Sign what, exactly?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Bradley finally spoke up. He shifted his weight nervously, but maintained a highly smug expression. "It is just a formality, Cassidy. We are becoming one family today. It is only right that we consolidate our assets. My mother had her lawyer drafted up this morning." I carefully picked up the document and read the clauses. They wanted me to sign Bradley onto the deed of my house. My $1.2 million craftsman home in a highly coveted Seattle neighborhood. A house I had saved for, negotiated for, and paid the mortgage on completely by myself for the last 5 years. I looked at Bradley, my throat tightening. "You want half of my house exactly 1 hour before our wedding?" Patricia crossed her arms over her chest, stepping between me and her son like a shield. "Let us be brutally honest, Cassidy," she sneered, looking me up and down with absolute disdain. "You are 33 years old. You come from a broken working-class background. You have no real pedigree to speak of. Bradley marrying you is a massive concession from our family line. We have a certain status to maintain at the country club and in our social circles. We cannot have it looking like my son is moving into a house he does not even own. You need to prove you are truly part of this family and that you respect his position as the man of the house." I could feel the blood rushing in my ears. The sheer audacity paralyzed me for a moment. I had spent the last 2 years tolerating Patricia's snide remarks about my career. She always called my job boring and masculine. She constantly bragged about Bradley being the charismatic face of the family, conveniently ignoring the fact that his salary was less than half of mine, and he spent most of his paycheck on designer clothes and luxury car leases to keep up appearances. But demanding half of my largest financial asset on my wedding day was a level of manipulation I had never anticipated. I looked past Patricia directly at Bradley, desperately waiting for him to tell his mother to stop, to apologize, to tear up the papers and tell me he loved me. But he did not. He just stood there fixing his expensive cufflinks in the mirror. "Come on, Cass." He sighed, using that condescending tone he usually reserved for service workers. "Do not make this difficult. I need my name on a substantial asset so I can secure better financing for my new startup later this year. You know I am the one with the real vision. You just crunch numbers all day. You should be happy to support my future." He reached into his tuxedo jacket, pulled out a sleek silver fountain pen, and held it out to me. The room went completely silent. The heavy scent of the white roses suddenly made me feel nauseous. I looked at the pen, then at the quitclaim deed, then up at Patricia's expectant, arrogant face. I did not reach for the pen. I kept my hands firmly at my sides, my spine straightening. "No," I said softly, the single word hanging heavily in the quiet bridal suite. Patricia's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "No," she repeated, her voice dripping with venom. "You are refusing, yes. Patricia, I am absolutely refusing to hand over half of my life savings to your son to fund his imaginary startup," I replied, my voice gaining strength. The silence shattered. Patricia stepped so close to me, I could smell her bitter perfume. "Listen to me very carefully, you ungrateful girl," she hissed, pointing a finger at my face. "You will pick up that pen and sign your name right now. If you do not sign that deed and give my son the respect he deserves, I will walk out there and call off this entire wedding right now. We will leave, our guests will leave, and you will be standing here alone in that ridiculously expensive dress as a complete public failure." I stared at Patricia, the venom in her words hanging thick in the air. The threat of a public humiliation of standing alone at the altar while 200 guests whispered and stared was clearly meant to terrify me into submission. It was a classic manipulative tactic, and for a split second, the sheer weight of the impending social disaster made me dizzy. I looked back at Bradley. Surely the threat of calling off our wedding would snap him out of this delusion. Surely he would tell his mother she had gone too far. "Bradley," I said, my voice tight, "are you actually going to stand there and let her threaten to cancel our wedding over a piece of real estate?" He offered a casual, dismissive shrug that made my blood run cold. He checked his reflection in the mirror again, smoothing the lapels of his tuxedo. "Honestly, Cassidy, Mom has a point. You are being completely unreasonable. We are a team now, or at least we are supposed to be. If you are not willing to share your assets, it really makes me question your commitment to this marriage." He turned to face me, adopting the faux earnest tone he used when trying to sell a bad idea to a client. "Look, I need capital for the startup. You know that. My ideas are what will eventually secure our lifestyle. You are a great financial risk analyst, but let us be real, it is a boring, predictable job. You do not have the entrepreneurial drive that I do. I am the charismatic face of our future. I need the house as collateral to secure a business loan. It is just smart leverage." Smart leverage. I repeated the financial terminology, snapping my professional instincts into sharp focus. "Bradley, your startup is an unproven concept without a single client. You want to risk the house that I paid off the roof over our heads to fund an imaginary company." Patricia scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please. Your little house in Seattle is hardly a grand estate, but it is a necessary stepping stone. Our family has a legacy of business ownership. Bradley is destined to be a CEO. You should be honored that your modest little contribution can help him achieve his rightful status." She stepped closer, her voice dripping with condescension. "You really need to understand your place here, Cassidy. You did not grow up with money. You do not understand how real wealth is built and leveraged. Our family has been members of the Bellevue Country Club for 3 generations. We have a reputation, a standard to maintain. We cannot have Bradley's peers thinking he married a woman who hoards her meager assets out of some middle-class paranoia. The audacity of her statement was almost breathtaking. The Bellevue Country Club membership she loved to flaunt was hanging by a thread paid for by a dwindling trust fund that her late husband had left behind. They were house-rich and cash-poor, clinging to a fading social status while drowning in quiet debt. I knew this because I had seen Bradley's credit card statements when we moved in together. He was maxed out on 3 different cards, funding a lifestyle he could not afford just to keep up appearances with his so-called elite friends. "And you think risking my home is the way to maintain your status?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "It is our home now," Bradley corrected sharply, taking a step toward me. "And yes, it is exactly how we maintain status. You have to spend money to make money, Cassidy. You are too risk-averse. It is why you will always just be an employee while I build an empire." He pushed the silver fountain pen closer to me. "Just sign the deed. Stop ruining the mood. We have guests waiting, and I have VIP investors out there I need to network with at the reception." "Investors?" I frowned, catching the slip. "What investors? I did not invite any investors." Bradley waved his hand dismissively. "I invited a few key players from my network, guys who need to see me hosting a high-caliber event. It is all about optics, babe. Now please, sign the paper so we can go get married and enjoy the $80,000 party you threw." I looked at the silver pen in his outstretched hand. I looked at the quitclaim deed sitting on my vanity, the stark black ink demanding I hand over half of everything I had worked for since I was 22 years old. I had survived student loans, 80-hour work weeks, and the grueling climb up the corporate ladder with absolutely zero help or inheritance. Every brick, every shingle of that craftsman house was mine, earned through sheer determination and financial discipline. And they wanted me to hand it over because I supposedly lacked pedigree. Slowly, deliberately, I reached out. My fingers wrapped around the cool metal of the fountain pen. I pulled it toward me. Patricia let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, muttering something about finally seeing some sense. Bradley's tense posture relaxed instantly. A wide, triumphant smirk spread across his face as he watched me pull the quitclaim deed closer. He thought he had won. He thought I was just another insecure woman, terrified of being left at the altar, desperate enough to buy a groom and a toxic family at the cost of my own security. He thought he had successfully bullied me into submission. He was incredibly wrong. I held the heavy silver fountain pen suspended an inch above the thick parchment. Bradley leaned in closer, his expensive cologne suddenly cloying and suffocating in the enclosed space of the bridal suite. I could hear the faint, elegant sounds of the string quartet warming up outside the heavy oak doors. Everything was perfectly staged for the biggest mistake of my life. I did not lower the pen to the signature line. Instead, I carefully placed its cap back on with a sharp, decisive click. I set it down gently next to my bridal bouquet. "What are you doing?" Bradley demanded, his smirk faltering just a fraction. "Sign the paper, Cassidy. We do not have time for games." "I am not playing a game," I said, my voice dropping to a low and steady register. "But before I make a decision that alters my entire financial future, I need you to answer 2 very simple questions." Patricia huffed loudly, crossing her arms tighter across her chest. "We do not have time for a deposition. The photographer is waiting and our guests are expecting a wedding." Question 1. I began ignoring her completely and keeping my eyes locked dead on Bradley. "Did you pay a single cent toward this $80,000 wedding?" Bradley blinked, clearly thrown off balance by the sudden shift in my demeanor. "What kind of question is that? We agreed you would handle the event logistics while I focused on the bigger picture for our future." It is a yes or no question, Bradley. From the $50 per plate hors d'oeuvres to the imported white roses filling this room to the deposit for the open premium bar your VIP investors are currently enjoying. Did a single dollar for any of this come from your bank account? "You know it did not," he snapped, his face flushing a dull, angry red. "But my money is tied up in the startup right now. And once we are married, your money is our money anyway. It is all the same pot, Cass. You are my partner, you are supposed to carry the weight when I am in a building phase. Our money. I repeated, tasting the absolute bitterness of the phrase. Right. Which brings me to my second question. If my firm downsized tomorrow, if I went completely bankrupt, lost the house, and had absolutely zero assets to my name, would you still be standing in this suite demanding to marry me? The room went dead silent. Bradley stared at me, his jaw working as he tried to formulate a response that would not make him sound like the blatant opportunist he was. His eyes darted to his mother for a fraction of a second, seeking an out. That hesitation was all the answer I needed. That is a ridiculous hypothetical, Patricia interjected, her voice shrill with indignation. And frankly, it is highly insulting. Bradley is offering you something money cannot buy. He is giving you his family name. He is elevating your social standing. You should be grateful he is willing to overlook your lack of pedigree to bring you into our circle. Exactly, Bradley said, immediately seizing the lifeline his mother threw him. I am bringing you into a legacy, Cassidy. I am giving you access to a network you could never reach on your own as some corporate desk worker. You are analyzing this like a cold and calculating transaction, but marriage is about synergy. My name and my vision combined with your capital. I am doing you a massive favor by pulling you out of your boring average life. Do not ruin this by being greedy. The word greedy echoed loudly in my mind. He was calling me greedy while standing in a designer tuxedo I had paid for, waiting to eat gourmet food I had purchased, demanding half of a house I had built from the ground up with my own two hands. As a financial risk analyst, my entire career revolved around identifying toxic investments before they tanked a portfolio. I ran the numbers in my head right then and there. Bradley had a negative net worth. He was drowning in credit card debt. His startup was nothing but a buzzword he used to sound important at cocktail parties. My net worth was highly positive and entirely self-made. This was not a marriage. This was a hostile takeover. In that fraction of the second, the illusion completely shattered. I saw him not as the charming, ambitious man I had fallen in love with, but as a parasite, a perfectly dressed, fast-talking leech who had attached himself to my financial stability. Suddenly, every red flag I had willingly ignored over the past 2 years illuminated my mind like a warning beacon. The times he conveniently forgot his wallet at expensive dinners. The sudden emergencies where he needed me to cover his sister Monica's rent because she was between jobs yet again. The luxury car lease he insisted was a necessary business expense heavily subsidized by my savings. He did not love me. He loved my excellent credit score. He loved my mortgage-free property. I was not a bride to him. I was a blank check. I turned away from him and looked at my own reflection in the massive gilded mirror. I saw a woman in a stunning silk dress who had almost sold her freedom for the illusion of a supportive partner. I saw a woman who had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let an arrogant fraud strip her of her assets, just to appease his mother's country club vanity. I closed my eyes and took one long, deep breath. The panic, the heartbreak, and the paralyzing fear of social humiliation entirely evaporated from my chest. When I opened my eyes again and exhaled, my demeanor turned to absolute ice. I reached up to my carefully styled hair. My fingers found the intricate pearl combs securing my expensive cathedral-length veil. I pulled the first pin out, tossing it onto the vanity where it landed with a sharp clink against the marble. Bradley frowned, his smug expression wavering into genuine confusion. "What are you doing?" he demanded, taking a half-step forward. I did not answer him. I pulled out the second pin, then the third. The heavy silk tool loosened, slipping off my shoulders like a suffocating weight finally being lifted. I gathered the sheer white fabric in my hands and dropped it directly onto the vanity. It landed right on top of the quitclaim deed, completely covering the bold black letters and the empty signature line. I looked Patricia dead in the eye, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "You are right, Patricia," I said, matching her icy tone with absolute zero. "There will not be a wedding." For a moment, the room was so quiet, I could hear the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Then Patricia threw her head back and let out a sharp, condescending laugh. It was a harsh, grating sound that bounced off the mirrors. She clapped her hands together, looking at Bradley with mock amusement. "Oh, this is rich," Patricia scoffed, stepping forward to snatch the veil off the legal documents. "You actually think you can bluff us? You think you can stand there in a dress you already paid for with 200 guests sitting in the ballroom and threaten to walk away? You are bluffing, Cassidy. You do not have the spine to cancel this event. You are just throwing a tantrum because you want to feel in control." I stood perfectly still, watching her unravel her own toxic narrative. "Go ahead," Patricia taunted, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "Walk out that door. See what happens. You are 33 years old. Your biological clock is ticking loud enough for the whole room to hear. You work 70 hours a week staring at spreadsheets. You have no prominent family to fall back on, no social standing, and no charm. If you walk out on my son today, you will die a lonely spinster. No one else is going to tolerate your cold, calculating personality. You need Bradley to give your life color and status. By tomorrow morning, you will realize what a massive mistake you made, and you will come crawling back to us, begging for his forgiveness." Bradley crossed his arms, puffing out his chest, completely emboldened by his mother's vicious tirade. He actually had the audacity to chuckle. "Cass, stop being dramatic. This little power play is pathetic. I have high-level investors out there waiting to see me. Do not embarrass yourself by making a scene. Just pick up the pen, sign the paper, and I will be generous enough to overlook this entire outburst. We can still walk down the aisle and pretend this did not happen." I looked at him, truly observing the man I had almost tethered my life to. He was nothing but an empty suit, a hollow shell of a man propped up by his mother's delusions of grandeur. He truly believed he was the prize. He genuinely thought his presence was worth handing over half of my hard-earned net worth. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not utter a single word of defense or justification. Explaining myself to them would imply that their opinions held any value, and they had just rendered themselves completely worthless in my eyes. I calmly reached over to the velvet chair in the corner and picked up my clutch purse. I slipped my phone inside and snapped it shut. Cassidy Bradley snapped, his voice losing its confident edge as he watched me move toward the door. "I am talking to you. Where do you think you are going?" I grabbed the heavy brass handle of the bridal suite door. I turned back to look at them one last time. Patricia was glaring at me, her arms crossed tight, still wearing that arrogant smirk, fully convinced I was about to burst into tears and apologize. Bradley was stepping forward, his hand outstretched, expecting me to hand him the signed deed. "Goodbye, Bradley," I said simply. I pulled the door open and stepped out into the lavishly carpeted hallway. Behind me, I heard Bradley shout my name, the sound muffled instantly as I let the heavy oak door click shut, severing my ties to them forever. The sudden quiet of the corridor washed over me, accompanied by the faint, elegant melodies of the string quartet drifting from the main ballroom. The panic they expected me to feel never arrived. Instead, a surge of adrenaline and absolute clarity coursed through my veins. I was not a victim fleeing a disastrous relationship. I was a financial risk analyst who had just successfully executed an emergency exit strategy. I had cut my losses before the market crashed. I did not run towards the parking lot to lock myself in my car and cry. Crying was for women who had lost something valuable. I had just saved myself from financial ruin. I adjusted the bodice of my silk gown, squared my shoulders, and began to walk. My heels clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floors as I bypassed the exit signs. If Bradley and Patricia thought I was simply going to vanish quietly into the afternoon and let them enjoy the expensive party I had funded, they had vastly underestimated the woman they had just tried to con. They wanted to leverage my assets. They wanted to play games with my money. It was time to show them exactly what happens when you try to swindle the person holding the master contract. I strode with absolute purpose past the decorated entryways and the towering floral arrangements. I ignored the confused glances of the event staff rushing past with trays of champagne. I did not head for my car. I headed straight down the administrative corridor, my eyes locked on the frosted glass door at the very end of the hall. The venue manager's office. I pushed open the frosted glass door without knocking. The venue manager, a meticulous man named David, was sitting at his large mahogany desk reviewing a stack of floral invoices. When he looked up and saw me standing there in my full bridal gown, his eyes widened in sheer panic. He immediately jumped out of his chair, stammering apologies, assuming there was a massive emergency with the bridal suite or my dress. I held up my hand to stop his frantic rambling. I walked over to the leather guest chair opposite his desk and sat down carefully, arranging the heavy silk of my skirt. The muffled sounds of the string quartet playing a classical piece drifted through the thick walls, a stark contrast to the absolute silence in the office. I pulled my clutch purse onto my lap, retrieved my driver license, and placed it flat on his desk. Next to it, I placed my phone, opening the digital vault that held all my legal documents. I brought up the master contract for the venue booking and turned the screen toward him. "David," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even and pleasant. "There is an emergency, but it is not with the dress. The wedding is cancelled." David stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He glanced at the door, likely expecting a furious groom or a panicked mother to rush in behind me. "Cancelled," he repeated, his voice cracking. "But miss, the guests are already taking their seats in the grand ballroom. The string quartet is playing. The kitchen is currently preparing the first course for 200 people. The entire staff is already deployed." "I am fully aware of the timeline," I replied, pointing directly at the digital contract on my phone screen. "I need you to look at the billing details and the primary signatory line on that contract. I want you to confirm exactly whose name is on the account that paid the $80,000 deposit." David leaned over his desk, adjusting his glasses as he scrutinized the glowing screen. "It is your name," he confirmed nervously. "Cassidy Lawson. The payments were made in full via wire transfer from a single account under your name." "And is Bradley listed anywhere on the financial authorization forms?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. David quickly opened his own filing cabinet, pulling out the thick physical binder containing our event details. He flipped through the heavy pages, rapidly scanning the highlighted sections and the attached addendums. "No," he said, swallowing hard. "He is listed as the groom, but he has no financial authorization. You are the sole contract holder." "Excellent," I said, offering him a sharp professional smile. "As the sole contract holder, I have absolute authority over how these funds are allocated and what services are rendered today, correct?" David wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Technically, yes. According to our policy, the primary financial signatory dictates the event modifications. But canceling right now means you forfeit the entire $80,000. The food is already prepped. The premium open bar is fully stocked and staffed. We cannot issue a refund at this stage of the event. The resources have already been consumed." "I am not asking for a refund, David," I corrected him calmly. "As a financial risk analyst, I know exactly how sunk costs work. The money is gone. I accept that reality. I am treating this $80,000 as an acceptable loss to save my $1.2 million house and the rest of my financial future." I watched David's eyes dart nervously to the hallway outside. He was a seasoned professional used to handling nervous brides and demanding mothers, but a perfectly calm bride executing a calculated cancellation was clearly outside his standard operating procedures. I needed to ensure he understood that this was not an emotional breakdown. This was a corporate restructuring. "David," I continued, making sure my tone left no room for debate, "I need you to understand that Bradley and Patricia have zero legal standing here. If they come into this office demanding answers or trying to override my decisions, you are to show them the door. I am the sole financier of this event. Every caviar appetizer, every bottle of imported champagne, and every single white rose in that ballroom belongs to me." David nodded vigorously, his professional training kicking in as he recognized who held the purse strings. "Understood. We adhere strictly to the contract. The signatory is the only voice we listen to." "Perfect," I said, "because right now Bradley is out there entertaining his VIP investors, acting like he is the mastermind behind this lavish affair. He intends to use the luxurious atmosphere I paid for to solicit business investments for his personal gain. I refuse to fund his fraudulent marketing campaign. Just because I paid for a party does not mean I am going to let a room full of arrogant strangers enjoy it on my dime." David gripped his pen tighter. So we are shutting the entire event down, sending everyone home. Not exactly, I replied, the corners of my mouth turning up into a cold smile. Sending them home right now would just cause a scene, and Bradley would easily spin it as his hysterical bride getting cold feet. He would play the victim. I do not want to give him that narrative. I want him to experience the exact financial reality he brings to the table. Zero. David leaned in, looking both terrified and entirely captivated by the shift in the atmosphere. What exactly do you want to change? Everything, I said smoothly. I want you to pull out the master catering list and the beverage service addendum. Since my future mother-in-law and her son love to brag about their wealth and status to their prestigious guests out there, I think we should give them the absolute best opportunity to showcase it. We are going to restructure this event from the ground up, effective immediately. I pointed to the first line item on the digital invoice. The dinner service. I had ordered a dual entree of butter poached lobster tail and prime filet mignon for 200 people. Cancel it, I instructed. Tell the kitchen to stop plating. Do not let a single plate cross the threshold of the grand ballroom. David swallowed hard, his finger hovering over his mouse. Cancel the entire dinner service. Cassidy, the food is fully cooked. It is sitting on hot carts right behind the kitchen doors. If we do not serve it, it goes straight into the industrial compost bins. Then compost it, I replied without a second of hesitation. Or better yet, tell the entire service staff to take it home to their families. Box it up for a local shelter. I frankly do not care what you do with it as long as it does not end up in front of Bradley and his mother. Strike the dinner service from the schedule entirely. David clicked his mouse, erasing the most expensive line item on the contract. Done. What about the cocktail hour appetizers? The truffle blinis and the wagyu sliders. Cancel those too, I commanded. And the 5-tier fondant wedding cake. You can slice it up and leave it in the employee break room. He nodded his hands, moving quickly across the keyboard as he processed the massive structural changes to the event. The total cost of the catering evaporated from the active manifest. He pulled up the beverage addendum next. Now let us talk about the bar, I said, leaning forward. I paid $25,000 up front for a premium top-shelf open bar. I want that shut down immediately. Switch the entire ballroom over to a strict cash bar. David paused, looking up at me in disbelief. A cash bar? For a high society Bellevue country club crowd? They are going to be absolutely furious. We have already popped several bottles of Dom Perignon for the champagne toast. Then put the corks back in, or drink them yourself, I said. If Bradley wants to impress his VIP startup investors, he can pull out his own wallet and pay for their drinks. In fact, I want you to be exceptionally thorough. The cash bar applies to everything. If a guest walks up and asks for a glass of tap water, charge them for the cup. If they want ice, charge them for the ice. No free rides today. I watched as David printed out the modification forms. He slid the papers across the mahogany desk toward me. I needed to physically sign off on the drastic downgrades. I picked up his pen and stared at the signature line. As the ink flowed onto the paper, a specific, infuriating memory flashed vividly in my mind. Just last month, I was reviewing my American Express statement during my lunch break. I spotted a bizarre charge for $3,000 at the downtown Prada boutique. When I confronted Bradley about it, he gave me a smooth, practiced lie. He claimed it was a crucial business expense, a luxury gift for the wife of an angel investor he was trying to court for his imaginary startup. I had believed him for exactly 48 hours. That Sunday, we attended a brunch at Patricia's house. Bradley's 28-year-old sister Monica came strutting into the dining room, carrying a brand new limited edition Prada handbag, the exact model that cost $3,000. She paraded it around loudly, thanking her amazing big brother for being so generous and successful. When I pulled Bradley aside and demanded the truth, he did not even have the decency to look ashamed. He gaslit me right in Patricia's hallway. He told me I was being horribly petty over a small gift. He claimed Monica was feeling depressed about being unemployed again, and he just wanted to make his sister feel included and valued. He used my money, the money I earned working late nights analyzing financial portfolios, to buy his spoiled, jobless sister a designer bag, just to play the role of the wealthy benefactor. I pressed the pen down harder on the venue modification form, signing my name with sharp, aggressive strokes. I was done funding their delusions of grandeur. I was done being the silent bank account for a family of entitled frauds. David took the signed forms and immediately reached for the two-way radio clipped to his belt. He switched to the all-staff channel. His voice was steady, projecting absolute authority to the entire venue crew. "Attention all departments." David spoke into the radio. "We have a code red modification from the master contract holder. Kitchen halt all plating immediately. Do not push the hot carts into the ballroom. Repeat, do not push the hot carts. Bar staff cease all open bar operations. Lock the premium liquor cabinets. Convert all registers to cash only effective right this second. Charge for all beverages, including water." The radio crackled back instantly with confused responses from the catering captain and the head bartender, but David quickly shut them down, repeating that these were the final orders from the financial signatory. I stood up from the leather guest chair, smoothing down the front of my silk gown. "Thank you, David. I appreciate your swift compliance." I walked out of his office and slipped into the darkened service corridor that ran parallel to the grand ballroom. The hallway smelled of roasted garlic butter and expensive cuts of meat. I moved quietly toward the heavy swinging doors of the main kitchen, peering through the small circular glass window. Out in the grand ballroom, the scene was playing out exactly as I had orchestrated. The doors had just been opened to the guests. 200 people dressed in their finest formal wear were milling about, finding their assigned seats. I could see Patricia holding court near the front, laughing loudly and showing off her pearls to her country club friends. Bradley was standing near the head table, shaking hands with a group of older men in expensive suits, his precious VIP investors. They were all sitting down, unfolding their crisp linen napkins, placing them eagerly on their laps. The elegant menus printed on cardstock promised a lavish five-star feast. Bradley gestured expansively to the room, clearly taking full credit for the luxurious atmosphere. Through the glass of the kitchen doors, I watched the venue waitstaff abruptly stop dead in their tracks. A line of servers holding massive silver cloches containing the filet mignon and lobster suddenly reversed direction. The kitchen manager was waving his arms frantically, redirecting the staff away from the ballroom entrances. The hot food carts were literally being wheeled backward, shoved into the corners of the industrial kitchen, just as Bradley's hungry, high-status guests waited for their first course. I smiled as the kitchen doors swung shut, sealing away the feast. But I was not finished. The reception still had a soundtrack, and I was not about to let Bradley and Patricia enjoy high-end entertainment while they figured out they were starving. I walked further down the service corridor toward the green room, where the main reception band was staging. I had hired a premium 10-piece jazz and brass ensemble to transition the crowd from the cocktail hour into the evening reception. When I opened the heavy acoustic door, the band leader, a tall man holding a polished saxophone, looked up in surprise at a bride wandering into the back rooms. I pulled out my phone again and showed him the digital contract. "I am the sole financier of this event," I said clearly. "The wedding is canceled. I am authorizing your minimum base pay right now as per the cancellation clause in our contract. You do not have to play a single note. Pack up your instruments and load out through the loading dock immediately." The bandleader blinked, looked at the authorization on my screen, and shrugged. He turned to his bandmates and clapped his hands. "Pack it up, folks. We get a paid Saturday off." Within minutes, the musicians were snapping their instrument cases shut and wheeling their heavy amplifiers out the back door. Meanwhile, out in the grand ballroom, the string quartet's contracted cocktail hour time officially expired. They lowered their bows, packed their cellos, and quietly exited the stage. The transition was instantaneous and brutal. Without the sweeping classical music to fill the cavernous space, the grand ballroom fell into an awkward, hollow silence. The only sounds left were the clinking of expensive silverware against completely empty porcelain plates, and the confused shuffling of 200 guests wondering where their food was. I slipped into an alcove near the main bar to observe the absolute chaos I had just unleashed. A wealthy-looking man in a tailored suit, exactly the kind of investor Bradley was desperate to impress, walked up to the mahogany bar. He confidently ordered a double pour of aged scotch and a glass of ice water. The bartender, strictly following David's new orders, rang it up on the digital register. "That will be $45 for the scotch, sir, and $10 for the ice water. Cash or card?" The investor froze his wallet half out of his pocket. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying in the overly quiet room. "What do you mean $10 for water? This is an open bar." "Not anymore, sir," the bartender replied flatly, pointing to a hastily printed sign David had placed on the counter. "The financial signatory has transitioned this to a strict cash bar. We are required to charge for all inventory, including glassware and ice." The outrage rippled outward from the bar like a shockwave. Guests who had walked over for champagne refills were suddenly pulling out their credit cards just to quench their thirst. The whispers began immediately. Wealthy, status-obsessed socialites. The exact people Patricia had invited to flaunt her supposed wealth were now loudly complaining about being nickel and dimed at what was supposed to be a luxury event. Through the crack in the service door, I saw Patricia stand up from her seat at the head table. Her face was turning a dangerous shade of purple. She flagged down a passing server, snapping her fingers aggressively. "Where is the first course?" she demanded loudly. "And why is there no music playing?" The server, looking absolutely terrified, simply shook his head. "You will have to speak to the venue manager, ma'am. We were ordered to halt all service." Bradley stood up next to her, his confident facade cracking into pure panic. He looked around the silent, foodless room, watching his VIP investors arguing with the bartenders over $10 cups of ice water. He patted his pockets, realizing he did not even have his wallet on him to smooth things over. The humiliation was settling over him in real time. He was hosting the cheapest, most disastrous high society event of the decade, and everyone in the room knew it. I had seen enough. The dominoes were falling exactly as I had planned. I turned away from the ballroom and walked down the back stairwell toward the private employee exit. With every step I took down the concrete stairs, the heavy weight of my past 2 years lifted further from my shoulders. I pushed open the heavy metal door and stepped out into the cool, crisp Seattle afternoon. The fresh air hit my face, smelling of pine and sea salt. It was the smell of absolute freedom. I walked across the gravel of the employee parking lot, my high heels crunching satisfyingly with every stride. I reached my car, unlocked it, and gathered the massive skirt of my $5,000 gown, shoving the silk fabric into the driver's side floorboard as I sat down. I slammed the car door shut, locking it instantly. The silence inside my car was different from the silence in the ballroom. This was peaceful. This was victory. But my work was not done yet. Bradley and Patricia were currently trapped in a social nightmare, but I knew exactly where they would head the second they escaped that venue. They would head straight for my house. The house Bradley still thought he had a right to. The house currently occupied by his lazy out-of-state relatives who had been treating my property like a free resort all week. I reached into my clutch purse and pulled out my phone. I needed tactical, legal, and physical backup for this next phase. I opened my contacts and scrolled past the frantic incoming text messages from Bradley that were already starting to flood my screen. I ignored them all. Instead, I found the contact for the one person who had seen through Bradley long before I ever did. The man who had sat me down at Thanksgiving a year ago and warned me that Bradley's financial stories did not add up. I hit the call button for my brother-in-law, Jamal. Jamal was my sister Sydney's husband. He was a brilliant, no-nonsense corporate lawyer who spent his days destroying fraudulent business contracts. He was a proud African-American man who commanded respect in any room he walked into, and he had absolutely zero tolerance for men who tried to financially abuse women. The phone rang twice before he picked up. The background noise on his end sounded like he was already in his car. Cassidy Jamal answered, his deep voice immediately attentive. "Are you okay? Sydney is freaking out because we just got a weird text from Patricia saying the wedding is delayed." I took a deep breath, gripping my steering wheel. "I am better than okay, Jamal. I canceled the wedding. I left them at the venue with no food and a cash bar." A loud, booming laugh echoed through the car speakers. Jamal did not even try to hide his sheer delight. "I told you at Thanksgiving that clown was hiding massive debt. Jamal said, his voice ringing with pure, unfiltered vindication. I knew his financial projections were a complete joke the second he tried to pitch me his imaginary startup over turkey and stuffing. Are you finally ready to take out the trash, Cassidy? I am more than ready, I replied, shifting my car into gear and pulling out of the venue parking lot. But I need tactical support. I just left Bradley and his mother standing in front of 200 angry, starving guests. The second they realize I am actually gone, they are going to panic. And knowing them, they are going to head straight for my house to do damage control or try to stake a claim. Sydney's voice suddenly came through the speaker, breathless and sharp. She had clearly grabbed the phone from her husband. Cass, are you safe? Are you driving? I am driving, and I am perfectly safe, Sid, I assured my sister. I did not sign the quitclaim deed. Patricia literally tried to hold the wedding hostage to force me to put Bradley on my mortgage. I walked out, canceled the catering, and cut the open bar. I heard Sydney gasp, followed immediately by Jamal letting out another sharp bark of triumphant laughter. That is my sister-in-law, Jamal said, his tone shifting into his commanding corporate lawyer mode. Listen to me very carefully, Cassidy. You executed the exit strategy perfectly. But we have a massive immediate problem, and it is currently sitting in your living room. Bradley's extended family. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Bradley had insisted on flying out his loud, entitled cousins and uncles from out of state. Instead of booking them hotel rooms, he had magnanimously offered up my house as a free vacation resort. I had spent the last 4 days hiding in my own master bedroom, while his relatives drank my expensive wine, left wet towels on my hardwood floors, and complained about the Wi-Fi speed. They are still there, I groaned, merging onto the highway. The ceremony was strictly no children, so his cousins stayed behind at my place with their kids. They have been treating my house like an all-inclusive hotel. Not for long, Jamal said firmly. Sydney and I are already in the car. We are 5 minutes away from your neighborhood. You need to meet us at your house immediately. Do not go inside without us. Bradley is going to call his family the second he realizes he is financially ruined, and we need to secure your property before they decide to barricade themselves inside or steal your valuables. Can we legally kick them out right now? I asked, the analytical side of my brain demanding clear parameters. They are technically guests, Jamal scoffed. They are guests of a man who does not own the property and who just tried to extort the actual homeowner. As the sole name on the deed, you can revoke consent for them to be on the premises at any moment. Once you tell them to leave, they become trespassers. And trust me, I am going to explain Washington state trespassing laws to them in a way they will never forget. I smiled, pressing my foot down harder on the accelerator. Thank you, Jamal. Just get here safely. Sydney added, her voice full of fierce sisterly pride. We are going to clean house, Cass, literally and figuratively. I hung up the phone and focused on the road ahead. The adrenaline was still pumping, keeping my mind incredibly sharp. I glanced at the dashboard clock. It was barely 2 in the afternoon. My wedding day had just transformed into eviction day, and I had never felt more productive. My phone started vibrating wildly in the cup holder. I glanced down and saw Patricia's name flashing on the screen. She was calling. I let it go to voicemail. 2 seconds later, Bradley called. I ignored that too. Then came a barrage of text messages, rapid-fire notifications lighting up my screen. Cassidy, where are you? The venue manager says you canceled the food. Are you insane? Turn the car around right now. My investors are leaving. You are ruining my life. I reached over, flipped the phone face down, and turned up the radio. The steady thrum of bass filled the car, drowning out the frantic digital screams of a man whose financial lifeline had just been permanently severed. As I drove through the bustling Seattle traffic, I mentally inventoried my house. I needed to ensure I knew exactly what belonged to Bradley. He had moved in 8 months ago, bringing surprisingly little of actual value. A few expensive suits he had bought on credit, a massive flat-screen television. He had financed his golf clubs and his gaming console. Everything else, the antique furniture, the high-end kitchen appliances, the artwork, the electronics, was entirely mine. I was not going to let his family touch a single item that belonged to me. I mapped out the fastest route to my neighborhood, expertly navigating the familiar streets. The sky overhead was a crisp, clear blue, a perfect Pacific Northwest afternoon. I approached my upscale neighborhood, turning onto the quiet, tree-lined street where my craftsman home sat. The beautifully manicured lawns and quiet sidewalks usually brought me a deep sense of peace after a long week of analyzing corporate risk portfolios. But today, my property looked like a chaotic frat house. 3 rental cars were parked haphazardly on my grass, their tires crushing the azalea bushes I had planted last spring. An empty beer carton was sitting on the edge of my pristine porch. I could hear loud music thumping from inside my living room. I pulled my car to a stop at the edge of the driveway, blocking the rental cars in. I put the car in park and took a deep breath, the heavy silk of my wedding dress rustling around me. I was about to walk into my own home and start a war. But for the first time in my life, I was armed with the truth, backed by the law, and absolutely ready to fight. Right behind me, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. The doors opened and Jamal stepped out, buttoning his tailored suit jacket with the calm, predatory grace of a lawyer about to win a massive case. Sydney stepped out from the passenger side, her eyes locked on the beer carton on my porch. She looked furious, protective, and completely ready to back me up. It was time to take out the trash. I sat in the driver's seat for one final moment, gripping the leather steering wheel as Jamal and Sydney walked up to my window. I rolled it down, letting the crisp Seattle air fill the cabin. The booming bass of the terrible music rattling my double-pane windows made my jaw clench. That music was vibrating through the walls of a $1.2 million property that I had secured through sheer, unrelenting grit. Looking at the beautiful dark wood exterior of my craftsman home, a wave of profound clarity washed over me. I remembered exactly what it took to get my name on that deed. It took years of missing vacations, analyzing volatile financial markets, and working 70-hour weeks in a high-pressure corporate environment. Every single month, I authorized the massive mortgage payment from my sole bank account. I paid the property taxes. I paid the exorbitant home insurance premiums. I funded the landscaping, the utilities, and the security system. Bradley never contributed a single dime to the roof over his head. I watched his lazy, entitled relatives turning my porch into a dump, and I vividly recalled the reality of living with the so-called future CEO. My mornings always started at 5. I would be dressed in professional business attire, reviewing global market trends with a cup of black coffee while Bradley was completely dead to the world, snoring loudly in the master bedroom. He rarely dragged himself out of bed before 11 in the morning. His version of building a startup involved shuffling down to my custom kitchen in his expensive silk pajamas, a set he had casually charged to my credit card. He would spend hours monopolizing my espresso machine, loudly playing podcasts about hustle culture and entrepreneurial mindsets. He loved to pace around my living room, shouting into his phone during imaginary business calls, pretending he was negotiating massive venture capital deals. In reality, he was usually just arguing with his equally unemployed friends about fantasy football drafts or complaining about how the current market was not ready for his visionary ideas. Whenever I came home exhausted from a grueling day of actual work, I would find him exactly where I left him. Spread out on my expensive sectional sofa, surrounded by empty takeout containers he had ordered using my delivery apps. He would look up from his video games and complain about how stressed he was from the heavy mental load of being an innovator. He was a master at playing the role of a tortured genius, using his supposed ambition as an ironclad excuse to avoid paying for anything. I had financed his entire existence, and his gratitude was attempting to legally steal the equity I had built. Cassidy, Jamal said, tapping his knuckles lightly against my car door to break my concentration. "You ready to do this? Because I am not billing you by the hour today, but I still like to work fast." I opened my car door and stepped out onto the pavement. The heavy silk of my wedding gown cascaded around my legs. I did not care if the hem got dirty. The dress was already a sunk cost, a relic of a life I was actively burning to the ground. "I am ready," I told him, smoothing down the front of the gown. "I want them gone, Jamal. Every single one of them. I want my property cleared out completely." Sydney walked over, her eyes blazing with fierce determination. She reached into her large tote bag and pulled out a pair of scissors. "Hold still," she commanded. Before I could ask what she was doing, Sydney knelt down and efficiently cut a massive slit up the side of my restrictive mermaid-style skirt. The heavy silk tore with a satisfying ripping sound. She handed me a pair of sensible flat shoes she had brought from her own car. "You cannot kick out squatters while wearing 4-inch bridal heels," Sydney stated practically. "Change your shoes. We are going to war." I quickly kicked off the painful designer heels and slipped into the comfortable flats. The sudden mobility was intoxicating. I could move, I could breathe, and I was completely prepared to tear Bradley's world apart. Jamal adjusted the cuffs of his immaculate tailored suit. He looked toward the end of my quiet tree-lined street. Right on time, he noted a sharp, satisfied grin spreading across his face. I followed his gaze. Turning the corner onto my street was not a police cruiser or a standard delivery van. It was a massive, industrial-sized moving truck. The enormous white vehicle rumbled down the pavement, the air brakes hissing loudly as it pulled up directly behind Jamal's SUV. The sheer size of the truck blocked the entire street, casting a long, imposing shadow over the rental cars parked illegally on my crushed azalea bushes. Two large, heavily tattooed men in matching work shirts jumped out of the truck's cab. They walked straight over to Jamal, waiting for instructions. "You called a moving company?" I asked, genuinely impressed by my brother-in-law's aggressive level of preparation. "I do not do things halfway," Cassidy, Jamal replied smoothly, patting his leather briefcase. "When you texted me that you were walking out of the venue, I knew Bradley's family would try to drag their feet and refuse to leave your property. People who like free things never pack quickly. We are not giving them the luxury of taking their time. I hired a professional rapid eviction crew. They are paid to bag up personal belongings and remove them from the premises at record speed." Sydney grinned, linking her arm through mine. "Jamal also brought a certified locksmith. He is sitting in the passenger seat of the moving truck right now. The second we clear the house, he is swapping out every single smart lock and deadbolt on your property. Bradley is not getting back inside, not tonight, not ever." I looked at the heavy brass keys dangling from my hand. The music bumping from my living room suddenly shifted to a loud, obnoxious party anthem. Bradley's out-of-state cousins were cheering loudly, clearly, oblivious to the massive storm about to hit them. They thought they were untouchable because they carried Bradley's last name. They were about to learn a very harsh lesson about Washington state property laws. "Let us go," I said, my voice cold and steady. Jamal nodded, gripping the handle of his briefcase. He took the lead, striding up the concrete pathway toward my front door, with the kind of commanding authority that made executives tremble in boardrooms. I walked right behind him, my ruined silk dress billowing around my legs, the flat shoes giving me perfect balance. Sydney flanked my right side, her posture rigid and ready for a fight. The two massive movers followed closely behind us, carrying stacks of heavy-duty black trash bags. We stepped up onto the porch, ignoring the empty beer cartons littered across the welcome mat. I did not bother knocking. I slid my key into the lock, turned the heavy brass handle, and pushed my front door wide open. The blast of stale beer, loud music, and cheap cologne hit me instantly. The entryway was a disaster zone of muddy shoes and discarded jackets. I stepped firmly over the threshold, claiming my territory. It was time to clear out the infection. I stepped into my own foyer, my ruined wedding dress dragging across the hardwood floor. The scene in my living room was a masterclass in disrespect. Bradley's cousin, a guy named Trevor who had borrowed money from Bradley twice since moving in, was sprawled across my custom velvet sectional, his muddy boots resting casually on my glass coffee table. Two other relatives I barely recognized were leaning against my marble kitchen island, aggressively pulling the cork out of a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir I had specifically saved for my anniversary. The house reeked of cheap pizza and stale beer. The television was blaring some generic sports highlights at a deafening volume. Not a single one of them noticed me standing in the entryway. They were completely absorbed in their parasitic existence, treating my $1.2 million home like a poorly managed youth hostel. I walked over to the wall panel and aggressively hit the master off switch for the smart home audio system. The obnoxious party music cut out instantly. The sudden ringing silence made Trevor jump, nearly knocking a half-empty beer bottle off the coffee table. He turned his head, his bleary eyes struggling to focus on the woman standing in a torn wedding gown. He let out a loud, obnoxious laugh, slapping his knee. Well, look who decided to show up. Did Bradley forget the rings, or did he finally realize he could do better than a boring number cruncher? The two relatives by the kitchen island snickered loudly, taking swigs directly from my expensive wine bottle. One of them, a woman in sweatpants who I thought might be Bradley's aunt, leaned over the counter. Why are you here, Cassidy? The wedding is supposed to be happening right now. Did you throw a tantrum because you didn't get your way? Bradley told us you were being difficult about the house. Just sign the paper and let the man take care of things. And while you are here, the fridge is completely empty. We ordered pizza, but we are starving. Be a good host and go make us some snacks. Bradley promised us a full spread. I stared at her, the sheer audacity of her demands temporarily stunning me. They were sitting in my house, drinking my wine, insulting my career, and demanding I cater to them like a servant. This was the family Patricia was so incredibly proud of. This was the legacy Bradley thought was worth half of my net worth. I didn't make you snacks, I said, my voice dangerously even, echoing clearly in the now silent room. Because this is not a hotel and I am not your maid. I am the sole owner of this property. Trevor rolled his eyes, swinging his muddy boots off my coffee table and standing up. He puffed out his chest, attempting to look intimidating. Listen, lady. Bradley said we could stay here for the week. This is his house too now. He is the man of the house. You need to calm down and go back to the venue before you embarrass him further. If you keep acting crazy, we are going to call him and tell him you are harassing his guests. His guests. I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. Bradley doesn't own a single square inch of this property. He doesn't pay the mortgage. He doesn't pay the taxes. He doesn't even pay for the groceries you are currently complaining about. You are not his guests. You are trespassing in my home. The aunt slammed the wine bottle down on the marble counter, stepping forward aggressively. You little brat. Bradley warned us you were unstable. You think you can talk to us like that? We are family. Bradley is going to put you in your place the second he gets here. You are going to sign that house over to him, and we are going to stay exactly where we are. I watched her face red with unearned entitlement and felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. I didn't need to argue with these people. I didn't need to justify my existence or my ownership to parasites who worshipped a fraud. I had brought professionals for exactly this reason. I stepped back, allowing Jamal to move fully into the living room. Jamal didn't say a word at first. He simply walked past me, his tailored suit perfectly pressed, his presence immediately commanding the entire room. He walked straight to the center of my kitchen, pulled out one of the bar stools, and dropped his heavy leather briefcase onto the marble island with a loud, authoritative thud. The relatives froze. Trevor took a step back, suddenly realizing that the dynamic in the room had shifted entirely. Jamal wasn't a nervous bride or an emotional homeowner. He was a corporate lawyer who destroyed people for a living, and he looked incredibly ready to work. Jamal slowly, deliberately reached up and unbuttoned his suit jacket. He let it fall open, resting his hands firmly on the kitchen counter, locking eyes with Trevor. He didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke with the terrifying, icy calm of a man holding all the winning cards. You seem confused about the legal definition of ownership, Jamal said, his deep voice filling the kitchen. Allow me to clarify the situation for you. Jamal popped the golden clasps of his leather briefcase. The sharp metallic click made the aunt flinch. He reached inside and extracted a crisp, thick file folder. He dropped it flat onto the marble island right next to the stolen bottle of wine. This, Jamal said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger against the top document, is the original warranty deed for this property, recorded securely with the King County Auditor. You will notice it features exactly one name on the ownership line, Cassidy Lawson. Trevor squinted at the paper, his false bravado faltering. Bradley said they were co-owners. He said he put the down payment on this place with his tech money. I laughed out loud, the sound harsh and sharp in my own kitchen. Bradley could not afford the down payment on a used Honda Civic Trevor. I bought this house 3 years before I even met him. He does not have a tech company. He has an active imagination and a massive credit card balance. Jamal did not let them recover from the shock. He stepped around the island, cutting off their physical space and forcing them to back up. Under Washington state law, specifically, Revised Code of Washington, Section 9, A.52.070, entering or remaining unlawfully in a building constitutes criminal trespass in the first degree. It is a gross misdemeanor punishable by nearly a year in jail. The aunt crossed her arms, trying desperately to regain her footing. "You cannot arrest us. We are guests. Bradley invited us here for the wedding week. We have a right to be here." Bradley is a non-paying occupant whose implied license to invite guests was just permanently revoked by the sole legal owner of the premises. Jamal countered, his voice dropping an octave into pure legal menace. Cassidy just withdrew her consent. "That makes you criminal trespassers effective immediately." Trevor puffed out his chest again, taking a foolish step toward Jamal. "You are just a lawyer in a fancy suit. You are not going to do anything. We will leave when Bradley gets here to sort this out." Jamal did not flinch. He did not even blink. He simply raised his hand and snapped his fingers once. The two massive, heavily tattooed movers, who had been waiting silently in the foyer, stepped forward. They crossed their tree-trunk arms, blocking the main exit to the hallway. The sheer physical presence of the two men drained the remaining color from Trevor's face instantly. "I am a corporate lawyer," Jamal agreed smoothly. "Which means I do not fight people in living rooms. I destroy them in courtrooms. I let the Seattle Police Department handle the physical removals. And as luck would have it, the local precinct is exactly 4 blocks away." Jamal lifted his left arm, pulling back his crisp white shirt cuff to reveal an expensive silver chronograph watch. He tapped the glass face with his index finger. "I am going to give you exactly 5 minutes. You are going to walk into those guest bedrooms, pick up your bags, and walk out my sister-in-law's front door. If you are still standing on this hardwood floor when the timer hits 0, I am calling dispatch to have you hauled out in handcuffs." The aunt's mouth dropped open in absolute horror. "You cannot be serious. We have nowhere to go. We flew all the way here from Ohio. I suggest you head to the airport and fly back." Sydney chimed in, stepping up beside me with a lethal smile. "Or you can go back to the venue and ask Bradley to pay for a hotel with his maxed-out credit cards." "Oh wait, he cannot do that because Cassidy just cut off his funding." Jamal pressed a button on his watch. A loud mechanical beep echoed through the kitchen. 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The clock is ticking. Trevor looked at the aunt. The aunt looked at the two massive movers blocking the hallway. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on them with crushing weight. Jamal was not bluffing. I was not bluffing. They were totally exposed, stripped of the false authority Bradley had promised them. "Grab your things," the aunt hissed to Trevor, her voice shaking with panicked humiliation. "Hurry up." The illusion of their high-status vacation shattered instantly. Trevor scrambled off the velvet sectional, his boots sliding awkwardly against the polished wood floors. He darted down the hallway toward the guest suites. The aunt abandoned my expensive Pinot Noir on the counter and practically sprinted after him, shouting for the other relatives upstairs to wake up and pack their bags. I stood in the center of my living room, watching the frantic chaos unfold. Doors slammed down the hall. Drawers were ripped open and shoved closed. I heard the panicked zipping of cheap duffel bags and the frantic shuffling of feet on the stairs. They were terrified. The arrogant sneers they wore just moments ago had been entirely erased by the harsh clinical reality of the law. 3 minutes, Jamal called out, his voice carrying effortlessly down the corridor. "If you leave anything behind, it goes straight into the dumpster." A younger cousin I had not even seen before sprinted out of a back bedroom hauling a massive, overstuffed suitcase. He did not even make eye contact with me. He just kept his head down, rushing past the two intimidating movers and bolting straight out the front door. Trevor and the aunt followed seconds later, dragging their luggage, their faces flushed red with exertion and pure shame. They stumbled out onto the front porch, nearly tripping over the empty beer carton they had left there. They scrambled down the concrete pathway toward their rental cars, throwing their bags into the trunks with frantic, jerky movements. Not a single one of them looked back at the house. They just wanted to escape before Jamal made good on his threat. Jamal hit the button on his watch again, stopping the timer. 3 minutes and 12 seconds, he announced with a satisfied nod. Not bad for out-of-towners. I let out a long, shaky breath, feeling the tension drain out of my shoulders. My house was finally clear of his parasitic family, but the real work was just beginning. Bradley's belongings were still infecting my space, and my phone was still buzzing relentlessly in my purse. I turned away from the open front door and looked at the two massive movers standing in my foyer. Jamal gave them a single sharp nod. Phase 2, he instructed briskly. Clear it all out. Contractor bags only. We are not providing complimentary moving boxes for a squatter. The movers did not hesitate. They walked out to the truck and immediately returned hauling thick, heavy-duty black plastic trash bags, the kind designed for hauling broken drywall and construction debris. It was the absolute perfect receptacle for Bradley's fraudulent lifestyle. Sydney grabbed a roll of bags from the taller mover and tossed one to me. Let us start with the master suite, she said, a wicked gleam in her eyes. I want the satisfaction of bagging up those ridiculous silk pajamas myself. We marched up the hardwood stairs, leaving Jamal downstairs to supervise the living room clear out. When I pushed open the double doors to my master bedroom, the sheer audacity of Bradley's existence hit me all over again. His side of the walk-in closet was stuffed with expensive tailored suits, designer loafers, and luxury casual wear. Every single item represented a lie he had told to someone. Sydney did not bother taking things off the hangers. She grabbed a massive handful of expensive Italian wool suits and dragged them straight off the clothing rod. The metal hangers clattered loudly as she shoved the entire pile into the black trash bag, crushing the lapels and wrinkling the pristine fabric. I moved to his dresser. He had a collection of luxury watches sitting in a velvet display case. I knew for a fact they were high-quality fakes he had ordered online to impress his imaginary investors. I dumped the entire velvet case into my trash bag. Next came his designer cologne collection, his overpriced beard oils, and his custom monogrammed cufflinks. I swept my arm across the mahogany dresser, knocking everything into the thick black plastic. The sound of heavy glass bottles thudding against each other at the bottom of the bag was incredibly therapeutic. Downstairs, the movers were working with ruthless efficiency. I walked down to the living room carrying two bulging black bags and saw one of the men tackling Bradley's entertainment center. I had paid for the 85-inch flat-screen television, so that remained securely mounted on the wall. But the gaming console, the virtual reality headsets, the expensive controllers, and the tangled mess of power cords were all swept unceremoniously into a contractor bag. This was the expensive equipment Bradley used to play video games at 2 in the afternoon, while claiming he was deep in corporate strategy meetings. The second mover was hauling Bradley's prized possession out of the hall closet. His custom-fit professional-grade golf clubs. He had bought them to look the part at the Bellevue Country Club, a place he was only allowed to enter as a guest of his mother. The heavy leather golf bag was dragged across the floor, the titanium clubs rattling violently against each other. Make sure that goes right on the front lawn, Jamal directed the mover, pointing toward the open front door. I want it highly visible from the street. While the movers hauled the heavy black bags outside, a man in a gray uniform walked up the porch steps, carrying a heavy tool belt and a portable drill. It was the certified locksmith Jamal had hired. He did not ask any questions. He simply stepped up to my front door and got straight to work. The mechanical whir of his drill echoed through the foyer as he stripped the old smart lock mechanism entirely out of the wood. The hardware that Bradley had his thumbprint registered to was tossed onto the entryway console. Within minutes, the locksmith was installing a brand new heavy-duty deadbolt and an upgraded smart hub. The heavy metallic click of the new lock sliding into place was the most secure sound I had ever heard. He is heading to the back patio doors next, Jamal informed me, watching the locksmith pack up his drill. Then the garage entry. We are establishing a total perimeter lockdown. Your access codes are wiped. The physical keys are being handed directly to you. Bradley will not even be able to get into the detached garage. I walked out onto my front porch to inspect the final staging area. The movers were tossing the last of the heavy-duty black bags onto the grass. They landed with heavy, ungraceful thuds right next to my crushed azalea bushes. The pile of garbage bags looked massive. Bradley's entire curated identity, his fake CEO wardrobe, his gaming setup, his overpriced golf clubs, all reduced to a pile of curbside trash. The visual contrast between my beautiful million-dollar craftsman home and the literal garbage bags on the lawn was a masterpiece of poetic justice. The air in the house already felt lighter. The lingering scent of cheap beer and Bradley's suffocating cologne was being flushed out by the cool Seattle breeze flowing through the open windows. I had successfully excised a tumor from my financial and personal life. We did it. Sydney breathed out, standing next to me on the porch and putting an arm around my shoulder. Your house is yours again. Before I could agree, a sharp, aggressive buzzing sound shattered the peaceful moment. It was not coming from outside. It was coming from the marble kitchen island inside. I walked back into the kitchen. My clutch purse was vibrating so violently, it was physically shifting across the smooth marble surface. The continuous frantic buzzing was setting off a dull roar against the stone. I unclasped the purse and pulled my phone out. The screen was completely illuminated, flashing rapidly as notifications bottlenecked the system. I stared at the digital display, my heart giving a hard, satisfied pound against my ribs. The screen boldly displayed 50 missed calls. The names flashing across the lock screen told an entire story of absolute panic. Bradley, Patricia, Monica. Over and over again, the names rotated in a desperate, endless loop of incoming calls and frantic text message previews. The shockwave had hit. The guests at the venue had clearly revolted against the cash bar and the lack of food. The VIP investors had realized they were sitting at a fraudulent event. The social annihilation Patricia feared above all else was currently happening in real time. The fallout at the venue had officially reached its peak, and they were finally realizing exactly who held the power. I stood in my reclaimed kitchen, staring at the illuminated screen of my phone as it continued its frantic dance across the marble island. 50 missed calls. The sheer volume was a testament to the absolute meltdown occurring across town. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the screen, and selected the voicemail icon. I didn't want to speak to them, but I certainly wanted to hear the exact moment their delusions of grandeur collided with financial reality. I tapped the first voicemail from Bradley, hitting the speaker icon so Jamal and Sydney could hear. Bradley's voice blasted through the kitchen, completely stripped of its usual arrogant drawl. It was a high-pitched, frantic shriek, the sound of a man watching his entire house of cards burn to the ground. "Cassidy, where the hell are you?" Bradley screamed into the receiver, the background noise echoing with the chaotic sounds of a massive, angry crowd. "The venue manager just told me you canceled the food. What is wrong with you? My VIP investors are furious. They are screaming at the bartenders because they are being charged for tap water." Tap water, Cassidy. You are humiliating me in front of the most important people in my industry. Turn the car around and fix this right now. The voicemail cut off with a sharp click. I looked at Jamal, who was leaning against the counter, a slow, immensely satisfied smile spreading across his face. He nodded for me to play the next one. The second voicemail was from Patricia. Her voice was trembling tight with absolute, barely contained hysteria. "Cassidy Lawson, you vindictive, ungrateful brat. I have never been so insulted in my entire life. My country club friends are leaving. They are leaving my son's wedding because you are too cheap to feed them. I am currently sitting in the lobby because I nearly fainted from the sheer humiliation of this disaster. You have ruined my family's reputation. When my son finds you, you are going to pay for this." Sydney let out a short, sharp laugh, crossing her arms, fainted from humiliation. I guarantee she just realized she can't grift a free 5-course meal to show off to her snooty friends. I tapped the third voicemail. It was Bradley again, and this time the panic had morphed into unhinged desperation. "Cass, please, you have to come back. The investors are pulling their backing. They are saying if I can't even manage a wedding reception, I can't manage their capital. They are literally walking out the door. Mom is having a panic attack in the lobby. You proved your point, okay. You win. Just come back and put your card back on file before my entire career is destroyed. I need you to fix this. I hit delete on the voicemail. He didn't want me. He wanted my credit card. He wanted his safety net to rush back in and absorb the financial blow of his own arrogance. I looked at the long list of incoming text messages previewing the escalating threats and demands from Monica. His sister complaining that her friends were laughing at her because the premium open bar was locked. I didn't reply to a single one. I didn't send a triumphant text or a lengthy explanation justifying my actions. Silence is the ultimate weapon against narcissists. Any response, even a negative one, feeds their need for engagement and validates their sense of importance. I chose complete, absolute erasure. I went to my phone settings and navigated to my blocked contacts list. I tapped Bradley's number and hit block. I tapped Patricia's number and hit block. I tapped Monica's number and hit block. Within 30 seconds, I had systematically severed their digital access to my life, with the same ruthless efficiency Jamal had used to evict their physical presence from my home. The frantic buzzing stopped instantly. The kitchen was finally blessedly quiet. "All right," Jamal said, clapping his hands together and breaking the silence. "The locks are changed. The perimeter is secure. The trash is on the lawn. I think it is time to celebrate a highly successful corporate restructuring. Who wants Thai food?" I realized I was absolutely starving. The adrenaline crash was setting in, and I hadn't eaten since a small piece of toast at 6 in the morning. "Let us get pad Thai," I agreed, feeling a genuine relaxed smile cross my face. "And extra spring rolls. I am buying." Sydney pulled up her delivery app while I went upstairs to finally peel off the remnants of my ruined wedding dress. I stepped into a hot shower, letting the water wash away the heavy hairspray, the expensive makeup, and the lingering tension of the bridal suite. When I emerged dressed in comfortable sweatpants and an oversized college hoodie, I felt entirely like myself again. The Thai food arrived, and we ate at the kitchen island, laughing and debriefing the absolute madness of the day. The large bay windows in my living room offered a perfect view of my front lawn. We sat there eating spicy noodles and watching the massive pile of heavy-duty black trash bags sitting by the curb, right where they belonged. The sunset painted the Seattle sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, casting long shadows over Bradley's discarded golf clubs and fake luxury watches. It was the best wedding reception I could have possibly imagined. We stayed up late discussing the legal parameters of the situation with Jamal. He assured me that because we had not signed the marriage license, I owed Bradley absolutely zero spousal support or division of assets. The house, the bank accounts, and my business portfolio were completely insulated. I went to bed that night in my own master suite, the house quiet, secure, and entirely mine. I slept deeper and more soundly than I had in 2 years. The next morning dawned bright and clear. I woke up at 7, the quiet peace of the house stretching out before me. I went down to the kitchen, made a pot of strong black coffee, and stood by the window watching the quiet street. The trash bags were still there, covered in a light layer of morning dew. At exactly 8:15, the absolute tranquility of my Sunday morning was shattered. A loud, aggressive pounding echoed through the foyer, rattling the heavy oak of my front door. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the desperate, frantic hammering of someone demanding immediate entry. I set my coffee mug down on the marble counter, the ceramic clinking sharply against the stone. I knew exactly who it was before I even checked the security camera. I walked deliberately to the entryway, pulling up the live feed on the wall-mounted smart hub. The high-definition camera showed Bradley standing on my front porch. He looked absolutely wrecked. He was still wearing the same designer tuxedo from yesterday, but the jacket was wrinkled and unbuttoned. The bow tie hung loosely around his neck, and his hair was a disheveled mess. He looked like a man who had spent the entire night watching his life burn to the ground. He raised his fist and pounded on the heavy oak door again, his face twisted in a mixture of rage and sheer desperation. "Cassidy," he screamed. his voice muffled but clearly audible through the thick wood. "Open the door. I know you are in there. Open this door right now. We have a massive problem." I stood in the entryway watching the live feed on the security monitor as Bradley continued to assault my front door. His fists slammed against the heavy oak wood, the frantic rhythm mirroring the absolute collapse of his fragile ego. He was panting, his breath pluming in the cool morning air, his normally perfectly styled hair sticking up at odd angles. He looked exactly like what he was. A desperate fraud whose safety net had just been violently yanked away. Behind me, I heard the heavy measured footsteps of Jamal descending the staircase. My brother-in-law was already dressed in a sharp casual button-down shirt and dark slacks, looking entirely too alert for a Sunday morning. He carried his signature leather briefcase in one hand and a steaming mug of coffee in the other. He took one look at the security monitor and let out a low, rumbling chuckle. "I see the groom finally made it to the reception," Jamal remarked, taking a calm sip of his coffee. "Are we opening the vault or letting him scream until his vocal cords give out?" "We are opening it," I said, reaching for the heavy brass deadbolt. "But he is not stepping 1 foot across this threshold." Jamal nodded, setting his coffee mug down on the entryway console. He positioned himself directly behind my right shoulder, an imposing, immovable wall of legal authority and physical protection. I took a deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the heavy oak door open just a few inches, keeping my hand firmly gripped on the edge to block any attempt at forced entry. Bradley nearly fell forward as the door swung inward. He caught himself on the doorframe, his bloodshot eyes widening as he saw me standing there in my comfortable sweatpants looking completely rested and entirely unbothered. He immediately tried to push the door open wider, shoving his shoulder against the wood to force his way into my foyer. "Move out of the way, Cassidy," he barked, his voice hoarse from yelling. "I am coming inside. We need to talk right now." Jamal stepped forward instantly, his large hand clamping down flat against the center of the door, stopping Bradley's forward momentum with zero effort. The sheer physical disparity between the two men was glaring. Bradley, in his wrinkled, sweat-stained tuxedo, looked like a panicked teenager. Jamal, tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating absolute authority, looked like a fortress. "You are going to stay exactly where you are on that porch," Jamal stated, his deep voice carrying a lethal warning. "If your shoe crosses this threshold, I am dropping you on the concrete and pressing trespassing charges before you can even blink. Step back. Now." Bradley scrambled backward, nearly tripping over his own scuffed designer loafers. He recognized Jamal, and more importantly, he recognized that Jamal was not someone he could manipulate or bully. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously, before turning his furious glare back to me. "You are a monster, Cassidy." Bradley spat, his hands shaking as he pointed an accusing finger at my face. "You are a cold, calculating, vindictive monster. Do you have any idea what you did to me yesterday?" My investors literally laughed in my face. They walked out of the venue. The bartenders were charging them $10 for tap water. $10. Do you know how humiliating that is? "I think it is a highly accurate reflection of your actual net worth," I replied, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "You wanted to host a luxury event, Bradley. You just did not want to pay for it. I simply adjusted the venue services to match your actual financial contribution." 0. My mother had a panic attack in the lobby. He screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. Her friends from the country club were gossiping about us right in front of her face. They treated us like we were street trash. "You completely ruined my family's reputation. You destroyed my life. I have important people blocking my phone number right now because they think I am a total fraud." "They think you are a fraud because you are a fraud," I corrected him smoothly. "You spent 2 years living in my house, eating my food and spending my money while pretending you were a future tech billionaire. I am not the one who ruined your life. I just stopped funding your delusions." Bradley's face twisted into an ugly, desperate snarl. He looked wildly around the porch, his eyes suddenly catching sight of the massive pile of heavy-duty black trash bags sitting on the curb next to the crushed azalea bushes. He squinted, his brain struggling to process the scene. Then he noticed the familiar titanium shaft of his expensive golf driver poking out of a ripped plastic bag. "What the hell is that?" he gasped, pointing a shaking finger at the lawn. Is that my stuff? Did you put my things in garbage bags on the street? I evicted you, I stated plainly. You and your entire parasitic family. They left in a hurry yesterday afternoon. I highly suggest you gather your garbage bags and join them before the neighborhood association complains about the eyesore on my property. Bradley grabbed the sides of his head, his fingers digging into his messy hair as the reality of his total displacement set in. You cannot do this. You cannot just throw me out on the street. We were basically married. We lived together. I have rights. You caused massive emotional and financial damages to my family yesterday. My mother is talking to her lawyers right now. We are going to sue you for breach of contract. We are going to sue you for the humiliation and the damages you caused to my professional reputation. You owe us, Cassidy. You are going to pay for what you did. You are going to write me a check right now to fix this disaster, or I will drag your name through the mud until you have nothing left. The sheer delusion required to stand on my porch surrounded by his bagged-up belongings and demand that I write me a check was almost impressive. He truly believed he could threaten his way back into my bank account. Behind me, Jamal let out a loud booming laugh. It was not a chuckle. It was a deep, resonant sound of pure, unadulterated amusement that echoed across the quiet suburban street. Jamal reached into his leather briefcase resting on the console table and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. He stepped forward, pushing the door open just a fraction wider, and shoved the thick folder directly into Bradley's chest. Bradley reflexively grabbed it, clutching the manila envelope against his wrinkled tuxedo shirt. You might want to read this before you talk about paying damages, buddy, Jamal said, a lethal, satisfied grin spreading across his face. Because right now you are the one holding a massive explosive invoice, and your imaginary investors are not going to bail you out of this one. Bradley stared down at the thick manila folder in his hands, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. He looked like a man who had just been handed a bomb but lacked the cognitive capacity to recognize the fuse. His fingers, trembling slightly from the chilly morning air, and the adrenaline of his own panic fumbled with the metal clasp. He ripped the folder open and pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers. The documents were printed on heavy professional cardstock bearing the ornate letterheads of Seattle's most exclusive event vendors. There was the logo for the premier floral importer, the crest of the luxury catering syndicate, and the watermark of the high-end beverage distributor. What is this? Bradley demanded, his eyes darting frantically across the dense paragraphs of legal jargon and itemized billing columns. He flipped to the second page, then the third, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. Why do you have the venue invoices? Those are not just invoices, Bradley Jamal said, leaning casually against the doorframe, his voice radiating pure, unadulterated legal menace. Those are supplemental vendor contracts. You see, when Cassidy asked me to oversee her legal protection yesterday, I did not just focus on the real estate. I had my paralegal pull the complete event manifest from the venue manager while you were busy taking selfies in your rented tuxedo. We wanted to see exactly how much of a parasite you really were. I watched Bradley's face as his eyes finally landed on the bold black numbers printed at the bottom of the pages. He blanched, the remaining color draining rapidly from his cheeks. You and Patricia thought you were incredibly clever, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and icy. When we originally planned this wedding, the guest list was strictly capped at 200 people. We agreed on a specific menu and a specific floral arrangement. But 200 guests were not enough for your mother's country club vanity, were they? And they certainly were not enough for your desperate need to play the role of a successful tech founder. Bradley swallowed hard, clutching the papers tighter against his chest. I needed to invite my investors. He stammered, his voice defensive, but lacking its usual arrogant bite. I had angel investors, venture capitalists, and key industry players who needed to see me hosting a high-caliber event. You were being entirely too cheap with the guest list, Cassidy. I was building my network. I added 100 VIP guests to the roster last month. It was a necessary business expense. 100 extra guests, I repeated, letting the sheer audacity of his entitlement hang in the crisp morning air. You went behind my back, bypassed the event planner, and invited 100 elite strangers to a wedding I was financing entirely by myself. But that is not even the best part, Bradley. You did not just invite them. You decided they needed to be properly entertained. Jamal stepped forward, pointing a long, steady finger at the second document in Bradley's hands. Read the itemized list, Jamal commanded. Read exactly what you ordered to impress your imaginary board of directors. Bradley looked down at the paper, his hands shaking visibly now. The wind caught the edge of the document, fluttering the page to reveal the catastrophic financial breakdown. I will read it for you, Jamal offered smoothly, a predatory smile flashing across his face. $15,000 for rare imported white orchids flown in from Holland, just to drape over the VIP tables. $20,000 for cases of vintage Dom Perignon, because the premium champagne Cassidy had already paid for simply was not good enough for your fake investors. And my absolute personal favorite $15,000 for a dedicated white glove beluga caviar station. Bradley wiped a bead of nervous sweat from his forehead. It was an investment in our brand, he argued weakly, desperately trying to cling to his delusion. I called the venue manager last week and added a few enhancements. I had to project wealth. Investors do not hand over capital to a guy serving standard wedding food. They needed to see that I operate on a higher level. I was securing our financial future. You were playing pretend with my bank account, I snapped, stepping closer to the threshold. You ordered $50,000 in luxury upgrades for 100 extra people, and you did not say a single word to me. You honestly thought you could just authorize a massive caviar station and vintage champagne, and my credit card would just magically absorb a $50,000 surprise charge at the end of the night. They had your black card on file, Bradley shot back, his voice rising in panicked defense. The venue manager explicitly told me the master account was fully funded. He said it was an open tab for the event. I am the groom. I had every right to make executive decisions for my own reception. They were supposed to just run the card when the night was over. Jamal let out a sharp, mocking sigh, shaking his head as if dealing with a particularly slow child. You have clearly never read a commercial binding contract in your entire life. Yes, Cassidy had her card on file for the master agreement. But that master agreement only covered the original 200 guests and the original menu. When you marched into that venue office demanding a sudden caviar station and rare imported orchids for your secret VIP list, the vendors required a new signature for the addendums. Bradley stared at Jamal, his brow furrowing as the legal reality began to penetrate his thick skull. The vendors are not stupid, Jamal continued relentlessly. They do not just hand over $50,000 in luxury goods without a legally binding authorization. And since Cassidy was actually at her office making real money, you decided to play big shot and sign the supplemental contracts yourself. I watched Bradley's eyes dart down to the bottom of the page. Right there below the staggering $50,000 total was his own messy, arrogant signature. He had signed his name on the dotted line, officially authorizing the massive debt. He still looked confused, desperately trying to force his fraudulent reality to make sense. So, what Bradley argued, waving the papers in the air. I signed it because I was there in person, but the billing profile was still attached to her master account. The vendors knew my signature was just a formality to release the goods. They were going to bill her today. That was the whole setup. He was clinging to the very edge of the cliff, absolutely convinced that my financial stability would somehow catch him before he hit the ground. I stepped right up to the edge of the doorway, making sure I was the only thing he could see. That is exactly how it would have worked, Bradley, I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal whisper. If the master contract still existed. Still. Bradley froze. The papers in his hands stopped rustling. He stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking, as the devastating truth finally began to dawn on him. But I canceled the master contract yesterday at 1:15 in the afternoon, I stated, delivering the final crushing blow with absolute precision. When the primary financier terminates the overarching agreement, all attached payment authorizations are instantly null and void. I wiped my credit card from the venue system completely. The vendors cannot legally charge a canceled card for supplemental services. Bradley went entirely pale. He looked like all the oxygen had just been sucked out of his lungs. He looked down at the documents, then back up at me, his jaw trembling. But the orchids, he stammered, his voice breaking. The caviar. They brought it all out. The vendors delivered it. I smiled, a wide, genuine expression of pure, unadulterated victory. Yes, they did, I agreed pleasantly, because they had a legally binding signature guaranteeing payment. Since I canceled my master contract, the vendors are coming after the secondary contract holder for the upgrades. That is you. Bradley stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck by a freight train. The thick manila folder slipped from his trembling fingers, spilling the heavily watermarked vendor contracts all over my pristine concrete porch. The crisp Seattle morning breeze caught the edges of the high-end invoices, scattering the evidence of his massive financial liability across the welcome mat and into the damp bushes. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but absolutely no sound came out. The arrogant, slick-talking marketing manager, who had confidently demanded half of my $1 million house just 24 hours ago, was entirely gone. In his place stood a terrified, broke man, realizing he had just purchased $50,000 worth of luxury, perishable goods with money he absolutely did not possess. Jamal leaned casually against the doorframe, clearly enjoying every single second of this financial execution. He looked down at the scattered papers flapping in the wind, then back up at Bradley's pale, sweat-slicked face. "The vendors are incredibly unhappy," Bradley Jamal said smoothly, his deep voice carrying a tone of lethal professional foe sympathy. When Cassidy terminated the master account yesterday afternoon, the venue billing department immediately flagged the outstanding supplemental charges. They ran the secondary authorization protocol, the one bearing your personal signature. The venue manager panicked because he had hundreds of pounds of imported caviar and rare orchids sitting on his loading dock with no primary financial backer to foot the bill. Bradley shook his head frantically, his hands coming up to grip his own hair. "No, no, no," he gasped, his voice cracking into a pathetic squeak. "They cannot do this. I do not have the money. I just signed the papers so they would bring the food out. They know I am good for it. They know my mother is a member of the Bellevue Country Club." Jamal let out a sharp, mocking scoff. "The Bellevue Country Club does not pay outstanding catering invoices, Bradley. I received a courtesy call from the catering syndicate legal counsel at 8 o'clock last night. They do not care about your mother's social standing. They care about their bottom line. They drafted the lawsuits before midnight. They are filing formal breach of contract and intent to defraud charges in King County Superior Court first thing Monday morning." Bradley's knees visibly buckled. He grabbed the wooden porch railing with both hands just to keep himself from collapsing completely onto the concrete. "Fraud," he wheezed, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. "It is not fraud. I did not mean to steal anything. I thought she was paying for it. I thought we were getting married." Jamal crossed his arms over his broad chest, an immovable wall of legal reality. "Claiming you expected your ex-fiancé to foot the bill because you secretly forged an agreement to impress a bunch of random investors is not a valid legal defense," Jamal informed him clinically. "You ordered the goods. You signed the contracts in your own name. You consumed the champagne. You owe the money. And since I did a thorough background check on you yesterday and discovered you currently have zero income, zero equity, and severely maxed out credit cards, the vendors are going to garnish your non-existent wages into absolute oblivion. They will drain your bank accounts, repossess your vehicle, and drag you through bankruptcy court until you cannot even qualify for a cell phone plan." The reality of his impending doom finally shattered the very last remnants of Bradley's carefully constructed facade. He snapped his head toward me, his eyes wide and brimming with desperate, humiliating tears. The fake CEO persona melted away, leaving behind nothing but a terrified con artist caught in his own trap. "Cass, please," he begged, holding his shaking hands out toward me. He took a staggering step forward, completely forgetting Jamal's earlier threat to drop him on the concrete if he crossed the threshold. "Please, you have to help me. I do not have $50,000. I do not even have $5,000. I am completely broke. I stood perfectly still watching a grown man cry over the consequences of his own staggering arrogance. "If they sue me, I am ruined!" Bradley sobbed, the tears spilling over his eyelashes and tracking down his flushed cheeks. "My investors blocked my phone number last night after the cash bar incident. My mother is screaming at me because her reputation is destroyed, and her friends are demanding she reimburse them for their travel expenses. I have absolutely nothing left, Cass. You cannot just leave me like this. I will pay you back. I swear I will pay you back every single cent. We were going to be a family. You love me." "You do not know the first thing about love, Bradley," I replied, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that cut right through his pathetic weeping. "You loved my credit score. You loved my mortgage-free property. You loved the idea of using my hard-earned wealth to fund your imaginary empire. You thought you could blindside me with a quitclaim deed on my wedding day, take half my net worth, and force me to pay for your luxury networking event. You gambled with my money and you lost." I looked down at the pathetic crying man standing on my porch. I did not feel a single ounce of pity, regret, or sadness. I felt nothing but profound relief that this parasite was no longer attached to my life. I looked past him, my eyes landing on the massive pile of heavy-duty black contractor bags resting near the edge of the driveway. I stepped out onto the porch, my flat shoes making a soft sound against the concrete. I walked right up to the closest trash bag, the one containing his fake luxury watches, his wrinkled silk pajamas, and his useless golf clubs. I pulled my foot back and kicked the heavy trash bag hard. The thick plastic slid across the concrete, slamming directly into Bradley's shins. He flinched, stumbling backward slightly as his own garbage hit his legs. "Take your trash, Bradley," I said, my voice radiating absolute unshakable authority. "And get off my property." I turned around, stepped back inside my beautiful, secure $1.2 million house, and grabbed the heavy brass handle of my solid oak front door. Bradley let out a desperate wail, reaching his hand out as if to stop me. "Cassidy, wait, please," he screamed. I slammed the heavy oak door shut directly in his face. The loud, definitive boom echoed through the foyer, instantly severing his frantic cries. I reached up and turned the brand-new deadbolt, the heavy metal mechanism sliding into place with a deeply satisfying click. I was safe, my assets were secure, and Bradley was officially locked out in the cold with $50,000 in debt and a pile of garbage bags. I turned away from the heavy oak door, my chest rising and falling with the deep, rhythmic breaths of a woman who had just excised a parasite from her life. Through the reinforced glass panels of the entryway, I could see Bradley's blurry silhouette stumbling away from the porch, dragging his heavy trash bags across the concrete. I did not watch him leave. He was no longer my problem. Jamal clapped his hands together, the sharp sound snapping me out of my adrenaline haze. "Excellent perimeter defense," Jamal praised, grabbing his half-finished coffee from the console table. "But before you completely relax, we need to head back into the kitchen. I have the rest of the financial discovery I promised you, and you need to see exactly what kind of bullet you just dodged." I followed him back to the marble island where Sydney was already pouring us fresh mugs of coffee. Jamal unclasped his leather briefcase once more, retrieving a second, thinner manila folder. He spread the documents out across the smooth stone surface, aligning them perfectly. "When you asked me to look into his finances, I did not just stop at his personal credit cards," Jamal explained, his tone dropping into his clinical corporate lawyer cadence. "I pulled the corporate filings for his highly anticipated tech startup, the visionary enterprise he claimed was going to make you both billionaires." Jamal slid a state registry document toward me. "His company, Synergy Vision Partners, is not a tech startup. It has no proprietary software, no patents pending, and absolutely no client roster. It is a completely empty shell, LLC, registered in Delaware. It exists entirely on paper." I stared at the black and white text. A shell company. But he spent hours on the phone negotiating. He had pitch decks. He went to networking conferences. He went to expensive hotels to drink on credit, Sydney corrected sharply, leaning over my shoulder to point at a highlighted bank statement. "Look at the corporate ledger." I scanned the financial flow of Bradley's so-called business. It was a disaster of staggering proportions. He had used the LLC to open massive commercial lines of credit, exploiting the relatively loose lending requirements for new businesses. He had drawn down nearly $80,000 in unsecured business loans. But the money was not going toward software development or marketing campaigns. Look at the outbound transfers, Jamal instructed, tapping his pen against a long column of routing numbers. I traced the lines. Every single month, large lump sums of cash were being transferred from the business credit accounts directly into a personal checking account. The name attached to the receiving account made my blood boil all over again. Monica. He was funneling the loan money to his sister. I stated the sheer reality of the scam settling over me. Exactly, Jamal confirmed. Monica refuses to work. She has not held a steady job in 4 years. Bradley used his fake startup as a slush fund to finance her entire lifestyle. Her rent, her luxury car lease, the designer clothes, and that $3,000 Prada bag you caught him buying. All of it was paid for by commercial debt funneled through a fake corporate entity, so you would not see the direct transactions on his personal bank statements. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. Bradley and Patricia had stood in my bridal suite just 24 hours ago, insulting my working-class background and praising their elite pedigree. They had mocked my steady, reliable career while heavily relying on me to fund their daily existence. Behind the scenes, Bradley was operating a desperate high-stakes Ponzi scheme to keep his lazy sister dripping in designer labels, pretending they were old money royalty. He was playing a dangerous financial game, and the bill was coming due. The commercial lenders started catching on, Jamal explained, pulling out a final stack of documents. 30 days ago, 2 of his creditors issued notices of default. They realized the LLC was a sham with no incoming revenue. They were preparing to pierce the corporate veil and come after Bradley personally. He was cornered. He needed a massive, immediate injection of liquid capital, or he was going to face felony fraud charges. Jamal slid one last piece of paper across the marble island. This one was not a bank statement. It was a partially completed application from a major national bank. This is why Patricia brought that quitclaim deed into the bridal suite, Jamal said, his voice dropping to a grave, serious whisper. This was not about ego, Cassidy. This was not about country club status or making him feel like the man of the house. This was a desperate, coordinated financial rescue mission. I looked down at the application. It was for a home equity line of credit, a HELOC. The requested draw amount was $200,000. The collateral listed was my address. If you had picked up that silver pen and signed the deed, Jamal continued, locking eyes with me, Bradley would have immediately become a 50% legal owner of this property. By Monday morning, he would have submitted this application, using his new equity in your $1 million home, to instantly secure a $200,000 cash loan. My lungs felt tight. I placed my hands flat against the cold marble of the kitchen island, grounding myself in the physical reality of the home I had fought so hard to keep. He was going to mortgage my house to pay off the debt he accrued, funding his sister's lifestyle, and to pay off the $50,000 VIP wedding upgrades he signed for Sydney. Added, her face flushed with protective anger. He was going to use your own house to pay for his lies. I stared at the unsubmitted loan application, feeling a cold shiver run down my spine. The pieces of the puzzle locked together with terrifying clarity. Patricia's aggressive threats to cancel the wedding. Bradley's desperate gaslighting about my lack of entrepreneurial spirit. They had orchestrated the entire wedding day drama, not out of arrogance, but out of sheer, unadulterated panic. They needed my house to save themselves from total financial ruin. The sheer calculation of it all was chilling. They had sat at my dining table for months, eating meals I cooked, drinking wine I purchased, all while silently measuring the walls of my home to see how much cash they could extract from the drywall. If I had caved to the social pressure, if I had cared what the 200 guests in the ballroom thought, if I had let Patricia's cruel insults break my confidence, I would currently be hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, tied legally to a man who was actively robbing me. I had not just walked away from a bad marriage. I had dodged a massive life-destroying financial bullet. I took a deep breath, letting the magnitude of that realization settle into my bones. I had not just walked away from a bad marriage, I had dodged a massive life-destroying financial bullet. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in watching karma execute a flawless, unyielding strategy. I did not have to lift a single finger to destroy Bradley or his family. Their own staggering arrogance did all the heavy lifting. I simply sat back in my beautiful, secure home, sipped my coffee, and let the natural consequences of their actions wash over them like a tidal wave. The social annihilation began exactly where they had tried to stage their greatest triumph: the venue. The 100 VIP investors Bradley had secretly invited were not just random guests. They were ruthless, highly connected venture capitalists, corporate executives, and prominent figures in the Seattle tech scene. These were men and women who analyzed risk and assessed character for a living. When they were forced to pull out their wallets to pay $10 for a glass of tap water at a wedding reception hosted by a man claiming to be a successful founder, they did not just get angry, they got suspicious. The whispers started before the guests even reached their cars in the venue parking lot. By Monday morning, those whispers had turned into loud, industry-wide conversations. Venture capitalists talk to each other constantly. They share information about frauds, scammers, and liabilities over power lunches and golf games. Bradley's name was passed around executive boardrooms like a highly contagious disease. They realized that a man who could not even finance his own wedding reception, who relied on tricking his bride to pay for his networking event, was absolutely not someone they could trust with millions of dollars in seed funding. Within 14 days, Bradley was completely and permanently blacklisted from the entire Pacific Northwest tech and marketing industry. His phone calls went straight to voicemail. His emails bounced back with generic automated responses. His professional network dissolved overnight as executives quietly removed him from their connections, unwilling to have their personal brands associated with a known grifter. He was officially radioactive. Any legitimate firm that ran a basic background check would now see a massive trail of unpaid vendor invoices and pending litigation. His career was completely dead. But the professional execution of Bradley was nothing compared to the absolute devastating social ruin of his mother. Patricia had built her entire identity around her fading membership at the Bellevue Country Club. It was her sanctuary, her stage, and her only weapon against the working-class people she despised. She used that club to project an image of old money royalty, treating the service staff like peasants, and looking down her nose at anyone who could not trace their lineage back a century. Unfortunately for Patricia, old money royalty actually pays their bills. The luxury vendors Bradley had signed contracts with the premium floral importer and the high-end catering syndicate were not just random small businesses. The owners of those companies were deeply embedded in the local elite social circles. Some of them were actual dues paying members of the Bellevue Country Club themselves. When Bradley defaulted on the $50,000 invoice for the caviar and the imported orchids, the vendors did not keep it quiet. They talked. They complained to their wealthy clients. They filed their breach of contract lawsuits publicly and loudly. The scandal hit Patricia's social circle with the force of an earthquake. The country club board of directors, a group of people who despised public embarrassment and financial deadbeats above all else, held a private emergency meeting. Patricia was summoned to the club manager's office on a Tuesday afternoon. She was not offered tea. She was not offered a polite warning. She was quietly, firmly, and ruthlessly asked to surrender her membership effective immediately. She was told that her presence was no longer aligned with the values of the institution, and that several prominent members had expressed discomfort sharing the dining room with her. Her entire social climbing career died in that sterile management office. The friends she had bragged to about her son's elite wedding suddenly stopped returning her calls. The women who had listened to her mock my lack of pedigree were now blocking her number because they did not want to be associated with a family of confirmed frauds. Patricia was completely exiled from the only society she cared about. She was reduced to an outcast, stripped of her status, and left with nothing but the crushing reality of her own poverty. The financial pressure mounted with terrifying speed. The lawsuits from the angry vendors hit the family like a barrage of missiles. The initial $50,000 debt quickly ballooned as legal fees, Late penalties and court costs piled up. Bradley had no income to garnish, which meant the creditors started looking at the assets of his immediate family. They started looking at Patricia's dwindling accounts and her heavily mortgaged suburban house. The facade of their loving superior family unit instantly shattered. Without my bank account to act as a buffer, the financial stress forced them into a tiny claustrophobic cage of their own making. There was no more luxury car lease for Bradley. There were no more $3,000 Prada bags for Monica. There were no more expensive brunches for Patricia. The well had completely dried up. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard about the spectacular collapse of their household dynamic. The polite, condescending tones they used to disguise their cruelty were entirely gone. They turned on each other like starving wolves fighting over a scrap of meat. Patricia blamed Bradley for ruining her reputation and bringing the lawsuits to her doorstep. She screamed at him for being a failure who could not even secure a simple mortgage deed from a naive bride. Bradley screamed right back, blaming his mother for pushing him to invite the VIP investors and demanding the luxury upgrades that bankrupted him. He accused her of ruining his marriage and destroying his startup by demanding he push the quitclaim deed on the wedding day. He yelled that her obsession with the country club had destroyed his entire future. And Monica, the spoiled, unemployed sister who had happily lived off my stolen money for years, was throwing daily tantrums because her credit cards were suddenly declining at the local mall. She was shrieking at both of them, demanding to know who was going to pay her rent now that the free ride was over. They were trapped in a toxic, miserable house together, drowning in debt, stripped of their social standing and completely out of options. The very trap they had tried to set for me had snapped shut perfectly around their own ankles. The reality of his eviction hit Bradley the moment his rented sedan pulled into Patricia's cracked, weed-infested driveway. He had gone from sipping espresso in my custom-designed kitchen to hauling his heavy-duty black trash bags down a flight of creaky wooden stairs into his mother's unfinished basement. There was no natural light, no sweeping views of the Seattle skyline, and absolutely no room for his delusions of grandeur. His fake luxury watches and wrinkled silk pajamas were unpacked onto a cheap plastic folding table that smelled faintly of mildew and damp cardboard. He was 34 years old, drowning in $50,000 of immediate legal debt and living directly under his mother's feet. Every time the floorboards creaked above him, it was a harsh reminder that he had completely failed to secure his golden ticket. The Daily Mail delivery became a source of absolute terror. Instead of receiving term sheets from venture capitalists, Bradley was receiving thick stacks of certified mail from the King County Superior Court. The process servers did not care about his imaginary startup. They cared about the breach of contract lawsuits filed by the catering syndicate, the luxury floral importer, and the premium beverage distributor. The financial bleeding was relentless. Patricia had to drain her remaining meager savings just to hire a bargain bin defense attorney to keep Bradley out of a criminal fraud trial. The legal retainer completely wiped out whatever cash they had left for daily survival. The country club royalty was suddenly struggling to pay the electric bill. This desperate lack of funds forced the ultimate, most poetic consequence upon the family. Monica, the spoiled, 28-year-old sister, who had proudly flaunted her stolen $3,000 Prada bag, was brutally forced into the workforce. Bradley's fraudulent LLC slush fund was gone, and Patricia could no longer subsidize her daughter's lazy existence. Monica had to get a job, and without any actual skills or a solid resume, her options were brutally limited. Jamal kept me updated on this particular development entirely for his own amusement. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon, laughing so hard he could barely get the words out. He told me Monica had been hired as a waitstaff trainee at a high-volume, low-tier diner just off the interstate. The image of Monica was a masterpiece of karmic justice. She had to trade her designer clothes for a stiff, cheap polyester uniform that smelled permanently of stale fryer grease and burnt coffee. She was clocking in for minimum wage, spending 8 hours a day on her feet carrying heavy trays of meatloaf and wiping down sticky vinyl booths. She was forced to plaster on a fake subservient smile for the exact type of working-class people her mother had spent her entire life sneering at. Every time a customer left her a $2 tip in loose change, Monica was violently reminded of the luxurious life she had lost because her brother was a greedy con artist. She ended up selling that infamous Prada bag to an online consignment shop just to afford her portion of the household utility bills. Patricia was forced to watch her children live out her absolute worst nightmare. The pristine elite bubble she had manufactured to hide her dwindling trust fund had completely popped. She was no longer a respected matriarch holding court at the Bellevue Country Club. She was a disgraced, financially ruined woman, trapped in a decaying suburban house, clipping grocery coupons at her kitchen table, while dodging relentless phone calls from aggressive debt collectors. They were living the exact grueling working-class struggle that Patricia had mocked me for in the bridal suite. They had looked down their noses at my background. They had called me a boring number cruncher who lacked pedigree, but my boring numbers had bought me $1 million home, absolute financial independence, and a life of incredible peace. Their imaginary pedigree had bought them nothing but a mountain of lawsuits, minimum wage shifts, and public humiliation. I had built my wealth through discipline and relentless hard work. They had earned their poverty through deceit and staggering arrogance. The contrast between our lives was absolute, undeniable, and entirely permanent. As the weeks turned into a couple of months, the frantic attempts to contact me completely died down. They realized I was an impenetrable fortress. Jamal had sent a cease and desist letter to Patricia's bargain bin attorney, making it abundantly clear that any further harassment would result in immediate legal retaliation. The silence that settled over my life was golden. I was sitting at my marble kitchen island on a quiet, rainy Thursday morning. The house was warm and smelled of fresh espresso. I opened my laptop to review a new financial portfolio for a highly successful client. The screen glowed brightly, illuminating the quiet sanctuary of my home. I opened my email client to check for a document from Sydney. A single unread email sat at the very top of my inbox. It had somehow slipped past my rigorous spam filters. I recognized the sender immediately. It was a new generic email address, but the name attached to it was Bradley. I paused, my finger hovering lightly over the trackpad. I looked at the subject line. It read, "Cassidy, please. I am so sorry. I lost everything. I need you." He was begging. The arrogant, fast-talking parasite who had tried to steal my house and trick me into funding his fake empire was officially broken. He was sitting in his mother's damp basement, drowning in debt, entirely stripped of his ego, sending out a pathetic, desperate flare to the only person who had ever truly provided for him. He wanted forgiveness. He wanted a lifeline. He wanted me to save him from the miserable, pathetic reality he had built for himself. I stared at the subject line for exactly 3 seconds. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel an ounce of curiosity about what lies and apologies filled the body of his message. I simply moved my cursor over the small trash can icon on the right side of the screen. I clicked down firmly. The email vanished, instantly, permanently deleted without ever being opened. I closed the laptop and pushed it away, leaning back in my plush office chair. A profound, unwavering silence settled over the room. It was a quiet Friday evening, exactly 6 months to the day since I walked out of that bridal suite. The air in Seattle had turned crisp, carrying the sharp, clean scent of pine needles and incoming rain. I stood up, walked away from my desk, and headed toward the back of my house. I stepped out onto the expansive cedar patio of my beautiful, secure craftsman home. The backyard was an absolute sanctuary. Soft amber string lights were strung across the wooden pergola, casting a warm, inviting glow over the custom stone fire pit. There were no fake tech executives loudly pretending to close venture capital deals on my deck. There were no arrogant mother-in-laws turning their noses up at my neighborhood. There was only peace, absolute financial security, and the people who actually mattered. Sydney was sitting on the plush outdoor sofa, her legs curled up underneath her as she laughed at something Jamal was saying. My brother-in-law was leaning against the stone masonry of the outdoor kitchen, completely relaxed. The imposing corporate lawyer armor was gone, replaced by a comfortable dark sweater and jeans. He held a crystal wine glass loosely in his hand, a wide, genuine smile on his face. I walked over to the patio table and picked up my own glass. We were drinking an incredibly rare, perfectly aged Cabernet Sauvignon. It was a bottle that cost more than Bradley's entire wardrobe, and I had purchased it specifically for tonight to celebrate the official legal conclusion of all tied assets. I took a slow sip, letting the rich, complex flavors coat my tongue. It tasted like absolute victory. To the best financial risk analyst in the Pacific Northwest, Jamal declared, raising his glass toward me. You saw the bad investment, you analyzed the critical data, and you liquidated the toxic assets before the market crashed. I have seen Fortune 500 companies fail to execute an exit strategy that cleanly. You are a legend, Cassidy. I raised my glass, tapping it gently against his. I had a phenomenal legal counsel on retainer, I replied with a grin. I could not have dragged the trash to the curb quite so efficiently without you, Jamal. Sydney cheered, raising her glass to join the toast. To taking out the trash, she echoed brightly. And to keeping the house. We drank the rich red wine, warming my chest. I walked over to the edge of the patio, leaning against the sturdy wooden railing. I looked out over my manicured lawn, the dark silhouettes of the oak trees standing tall against the night sky. I took a deep, grounding breath, reflecting on the absolute madness of the journey that had brought me to this exact moment. 6 months ago, I was standing in a $5,000 silk gown, terrified of public humiliation. I was conditioned to believe that walking away from the altar would make me a colossal failure. Patricia had looked me dead in the eye and promised I would die a lonely, miserable spinster if I did not sign over my hard-earned wealth to her parasitic son. She tried to leverage my deepest insecurities against my financial independence. She was incredibly catastrophically wrong. I did not get a wedding. I did not get the flawless photographs, the tear-fondant cake, or the socially acceptable label of being a wife to a supposedly successful man. I lost an $80,000 deposit, but when I look at the grand scheme of my life, that lost deposit was the cheapest tuition I could have possibly paid to learn the most valuable lesson of my existence. I gained something infinitely better than a hollow marriage. I gained my absolute freedom. I retained full ownership of my massive assets. I kept my pristine credit score, my thriving business, and my beautifully secure home. Most importantly, I retained my self-respect. I did not shrink myself to fit into their narcissistic, fraudulent narrative. I did not hand over my power to a man who wanted to use my bank account as his personal playground. I survived the fire they tried to trap me in, and I walked out of the flames holding the deed to my own life. I turned back to look at Sydney and Jamal. They were arguing playfully about what movie we were going to watch in my massive home theater tonight. This was my family. These were the people who showed up when the absolute worst happened, who brought a moving truck and a locksmith instead of excuses and demands. They were fiercely protective, wildly intelligent, and completely loyal. I was far from lonely. My life was richer and more vibrant than it had ever been. To anyone out there who finds themselves standing at a crossroads, staring at a toxic situation that demands you sacrifice your security for their comfort, listen to me very carefully. Never settle for someone who wants to leverage your success instead of matching it. If an in-law demands your submission to stroke their ego, or a partner asks you to fund their delusions while dismissing your hard work, show them the door immediately. Do not let the fear of public judgment force you into a private nightmare. Society will judge a canceled wedding, but society will not pay your mortgage when a parasite bankrupts you. Know your absolute worth. Calculate the risks. Trust your instincts. And never ever be afraid to cancel the contract. You are the sole signatory of your own life. Make sure you are the only one holding the pen. The most powerful takeaway from Cassidy's journey is that your financial and emotional security should never be the entry fee for love. Society often pressures us to compromise our hard-earned assets or swallow disrespect just to avoid the stigma of a canceled milestone. However, choosing to walk away from a parasitic partner is not a public failure. It is the ultimate act of self-respect. True partners will match your ambition, not leech off it to fund their own delusions of grandeur. Always protect your peace, your assets, and your independence. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic situation to protect your worth? Share your story in the comments below.